casting American citizens as American heroes. It is not just political solutions that we need or economic solutions. It is moral solutions and solutions of the heart that's going to require for us to move America forward into the challenges we see in the 21st century. And the place for us to look for those values is to our American veterans. Certainly those who lost their lives in the defense of this country. And personally, when I think about veterans, I have a whole list of folks that I think about, starting with George Bass, 2 years ahead of me at West Point. Not just a cadet who was my squad leader, but the man I wanted to be, who held the moral values, took care of his people, was inspired to serve his country, and showed the strength and dedication that I wanted to show when I grew up. I was 18. He was 21. At the age of 24, he lost his life in a rice paddy in Vietnam, leading an infantry platoon. I think about George Bass every day of my life. I think about Kenny Gillingham, who was 1 year ahead of me at West Point, and taught me on the sport parachute team how to be not just a jumper, but a jump master. So that eventually I could be in charge of other soldiers, more than 800 parachute jumps. I really looked up to Kennedy as not just as a veteran, but as a friend. He embodied the values of West Point: duty, honor, country. Kenny didn't die on the battlefield. Kenny died in a training jump at Ranger School in Fort Benning, Georgia. I think about Dave Pickett, who was here behind me at West Point. Dave was a guy who not only embodied our values, he did them so well I trusted him to date my sister. Dave was a helicopter pilot who lost his life, murdered by communist guerrillas in El Salvador when his helicopter went down while he and his crew were delivering medical supplies, trying to win us friends in remote villages in El Salvador. And the thing about Jerry Taylor, my classmate at West Point, talk about a guy to look up to who really embodied the values we see in veterans today. Jerry had received a battlefield commission and battlefield promotion to the rank of captain on the battlefield of Vietnam, and resigned his commission and started over as a cadet at West Point to get his education and launch himself on a career. Jerry had 28 years of service and spoke a variety of languages and had a full career in special operations when he was leading a team in Iraq, working around the no-fly zone. Jerry had been in the country a year with his team. He was training his replacement team on his last mission when Jerry was leading the 2 helicopters that were shot down by our own fighters several years ago because they were mistaken for enemies. Jerry's family was already scheduled to go to the airport and meet him to return home. Instead, they went that same day to meet his body. I think about those sacrifices every single day. But it is not just the sacrifice of those who lost their lives, it's the sacrifices of those who live day to day those values. If you have never visited a nuclear submarine and never get the opportunity, you need to do it. You need to understand what it's like to sleep in the forward torpedo area in a submarine on a bunk that is about 24 inches wide, and hanging immediately above you is a torpedo that weighs several tons, 18 inches away from your face. And you get that bunk 8 hours a day, and when you get up, it goes to somebody else for 8 hours, and then a third sailor for 8 hours, and then it's your turn again. You need to think about how they are living right now on deployment, protecting you and me around the world. You need to think about the sacrifices, I do, of Air Force personnel. I have a very good friend who's an F-15 pilot. He put it in perspective with me when he said, Dave, you got to remember that when a commercial pilot takes off and lands, that's the biggest challenge he has all day long. When I take off and land as an F-15 pilot, it's the easiest thing I do. I think about that a lot. I think about the sacrifices of Army soldiers and the people that I know who have served day in, day out, and are deployed around the world today. When I asked my oldest boy what he did when it was off time in Iraq, he said, I usually volunteer at the hospital. He said, there's lots of jobs other people don't want to do. I said, like what? He said, I squeegee out the blood in the emergency room where they bring in the aircraft and they offload the patients. Those guys work hard, the medics, the doctors. They don't want to do that job. I go volunteer to do it. I think about those Army volunteers every day. And I think about the Marines, standing guard at every embassy, watching for bombs around the world. I was inspired a couple of years ago when I was a speechwriter for the 4-star in the Pacific, that commanded all U.S. forces. We had a meeting in the Philippines at Subic Bay that ran into the night. And at the end of the meeting, the commander of Subic Bay offered this 4-star a ride home. My boss said, no, he said, it's only about 2 blocks from where I'm staying. I'd like to stretch my legs. I'll just walk. Very unusual for a 4-star to actually walk. But he took off. He made a wrong turn, a block in the way in the dark. He made a second wrong turn, found himself face to face with a big sign, a red gold sign that said, restricted area, no entry. And a voice that barked out of the darkness, halt, who's there? He had encountered an armed Marine guard. Well, armed Marine guards don't fool around in the dark, so the admiral paid attention. And the boy said, advance and be recognized, state your name. The admiral, I won't tell you who he was, stated his name. And the guard said, take out your ID card, put it on the ground, retreat two steps, and assume the position of attention. Well, being no fool, in the dark, the admiral did that. And the Marine guard picked up the ID card and with his flashlight, looked at the ID card, then put his flashlight on the face of the admiral, and then went to his shoulder, where the shoulder knots showed the 4 stars. Then back to the ID card, then back to the face, then back to the rank, then back to the ID card, back to the face. Clearly, this eventuality was not covered by the guard's instructions for this post. And so after this went on for a while, finally the admiral, out of patience, said, son, are you going to leave a 4-star standing here at attention all night long? No, the Lance Corporal replied, parade rest. I think about the sacrifice and service of the Marines doing their duty all day, every day. And finally, I think about their families. It is not just them, it is their families. My children were in 17 different schools before they reached college. My wife packed and moved 10 different times, and 11 different times in our first 20 years together of married life. I think about their sacrifices. And I think about the sacrifices of everyone who has someone on active duty today and watches the media. About 3 years ago, I turned on CNN in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, and saw smoke rising over the headquarters building in the Green Zone. And at that time, my oldest boy was serving in that building. So I tried never to bother him with an email, but I shot him an immediate email that said, are you okay? And I got a little ping, it came right back, and he said, well, I was looking at the picture, the smoke was still rising over the building, and the email said, boy, was that loud. Well, that made me feel better, but not everything I see on the media does make me feel better. Last week, we had 2 aircraft that ran together in Afghanistan, 2 two-seat aircraft. It just said 4 pilots lost by the collision of 2 aircraft. I have a nephew who's flying Apaches, a 2-seat aircraft in Afghanistan, a Ross volunteer, a graduate of Company F2. I called my sister, his mom, and said, do you know anything? She said, no, we haven't heard from Mark. He deployed to a remote area 2 months ago. He said he won't be up, we don't know anything. So we spent an agonizing day until we realized, we got the news, what unit it was not his unit. 4 other American mothers got news that was not so good from the media that day. And so I guess what I'd urge you to do is just think about this. American veterans, those who have died on the battlefield, those who died in other ways in the service of their country, those who are simply living today, or have lived in a manner that brings honor to themselves, their country, and those around them. Those are the people that we want to emulate. That's the lives that we want to talk to our children about. That's how we want to bring up. What we want to do is foster a new generation of American heroes. When my dad was 2 weeks from dying here about 3 years ago, he was reduced by age and by illness to using a walker. And he got up out of the living room to come to supper one night at the kitchen, and with the walker, he moved about 3 steps, and he just stopped, and his knees buckled, and I just thought he wouldn't be able to go on anymore. So I said, Dad, you want to just sit here and I'll bring you the food? And he said, no, I'm sure I can make it. I learned this in the Army. You can always take one more step. That's the lesson for us to deliver to our children about America. In serving, in being selfless servants of our country and our fellow citizens, we can always take one more step. Please remember that when you leave this event here today. God bless you. God bless America.